There's a hollow in the high coal country of West Virginia where, if you walk far enough up the wrong holler, you'll come to a fence. Just a fence. Old barbed wire strung on newer posts, a gate that somebody keeps oiled so it never squeaks. And past that gate, set into the mountainside, there's a wall of poured concrete and fieldstone where a mine entrance used to be. You wouldn't think much of it. People seal old mines all the time around here. Except for the men. There were always 12 of them. Never 11, never 13. 4 at a time. 3 turns a day. Around the clock, every day of the year. In the rain and the snow, and the long blue cold of those mountain winters. They've been there, in one form or another, for more than 100 years. And nobody up that hollow will tell you why. So tonight, I'm going to tell you. Before I start, I want you to do something for me. Wherever you are right now, I want you to tell me in the comments where you're listening from. The town, the state, the room. I read them. I like knowing how far this voice carries before it reaches you. And a note before this one begins. If what you're about to hear is the kind of story you'd want more of, I've put 10 of them into an audiobook. The Hollow Files. 5 hours, 10 counties. The same voice as the one you're listening to now. You'll find the link in the description and at the top of the comments. Now then, the story. It begins in the autumn of 1911 in a company town called Cold Springs in a county I will not name because some of the people there still don't care for strangers asking. The town belonged to the Kanawha Coal and Coke Company. The houses belonged to Kanawha. The store belonged to Kanawha. The little wooden church on the rise belonged to Kanawha too, though they let a circuit preacher use it on Sundays, which was generous of them. And the mine, of course, belonged to Kanawha. The man who ran the inside of that mine was named Cyrus Holloway. He was 53 years old that autumn, and he'd been underground since before some of his diggers were born. Tall, lean, gone gray at the temples in a way that made the younger men trust him without quite knowing why. His hands were the kind of hands you only get one way. By 40 years of holding a pick and a shovel and a lamp in the dark. The nails grown thick, the knuckles swelled up like the burls on an oak. He had a way of standing very still and listening to a mine, the way a doctor listens to a chest. And the men said old Cyrus could hear a roof go bad a full day before it ever dropped. That was his gift. That was also, in the end, his curse. Because Cyrus Holloway could hear things in that mountain that the other men could not. Now, you have to understand what a place like that was. A coal mine isn't a hole. It's a town. It's miles of it running back into the hill, level after level, heading after heading. With rooms cut off the main and pillars of coal left, standing to hold the whole weight of the mountain up over your head. The men went in before light and came out after dark, all autumn, all winter, so that some of them didn't see the sun at all except on a Sunday. They worked by the little flame of a carbide lamp on the front of a cap, a flame about the size of your thumbnail. And that flame was the whole world. Everything past it was black. You learned to read that blackness. You learned the sounds of it. The water that ticked down somewhere. The timbers that talked when the weight settled on them. A long, slow groan like an old man getting up out of a chair. The far-off thud of the cutting going on in another section. A mine is never silent. A working mine is full of small, honest noises. and a miner sleeps better hearing them than he does up in the quiet of his own bed. So when the noises changed, the men noticed. It started in the deep part. There was a section they called number 11. The furthest back, the newest cut, where they were chasing the seam as it dipped down under the mountain. Number 11 was a long way in. A man had to ride the ponies most of an hour just to reach the face of it. It was hot back there, and the air came slow, and the company kept talking about sinking an air shaft to freshen it the way they always talk about things they don't mean to pay for. It was in number 11 that the cutting crew hit the wall. Now when I say wall, I don't mean the coal face. They expected coal. What they hit was rock where there should not have been rock. A hard gray seam of it, cutting straight across their heading like somebody had walked it in and set it there. The foreman of that crew was a man named Garrett Ashmore. He was the company's engineer, 38 years old, a younger man than Cyrus. Schooled back east at Lehigh University, the kind who carried his maps in an oilcloth case and believed in them more than he believed in the mountain. Ashmore looked at his maps. He looked at the rock. He looked at his maps again. According to the maps, there was nothing there. No fault, no old working. Solid seam for a quarter mile in every direction. But there was the rock. So they did what miners do. They cut it. And behind the rock, there was a space. I want you to picture this carefully because it matters. They put their tools through the last of the stone, and instead of more stone, the bars went loose into nothing, into open air. And a draft came back through the hole at them, and that draft was cold. Not cooled, cold. The way a cellar is cold. The way the inside of a well is cold. Cold the way nothing a mile back inside a hot mountain in autumn has any business being. And it carried a smell. The men who were there could never quite say what it was. One of them said it smelled like a creek in February. One said it smelled like the inside of an old trunk that hadn't been opened since somebody died. The closest any of them came was an old digger named Lazarus Cruz who'd been down more holes than anybody alive in that county. 67 years old and tough as a boot heel. Lazarus put his face to that hole and breathed in and went quiet for a long time, and then he said, "That's not our mountain." They sent for Cyrus Holloway. He came back on the pony, and he sat there a while at the face of number 11, looking at that black gap in the gray rock, the cold breath of it sliding out over them all. He had them widen it careful, timber it up, and then he took a fresh lamp, and he went through. It was a chamber, a room in the rock, but not a room the company had cut, and not a room any company had cut. The walls of it were too smooth in some places and too rough in others. There were timbers standing in it, but they were not Kanawha timbers. They were old, black with age, soft when you pressed them. The kind of old that you do not see in a mountain, that white men only opened up 40 years before. And the timbers had been set wrong. Set in a circle almost like the posts of something. Like a fence, down there in the dark. And the floor of that chamber sloped away into a hole. A natural shaft going straight down, deeper than the lamp could throw. Cyrus dropped a stone in it and counted. He was a patient man, and he counted a long time, and he never heard it land. Now, you may say there's nothing strange in that. The mountains are full of old caves, full of holes that go down farther than a stone will tell you. And you'd be right. I've stood at the edge of plenty of them myself, up in the Monongahela National Forest and down along the New River Gorge. There's nothing in a deep hole but a deep hole. But Cyrus Holloway stood at the edge of that one, and the cold came up out of it across his face, and his little carbide flame, that thumbnail of light that was his whole world, leaned over sideways toward the hole, as if the hole were breathing in. He stood there until the flame straightened, and then it leaned again. In, out. Slow, regular. The way a chest moves. He came up out of there, and he did not say much. That was his way. But the men who rode the pony back with him said the captain's face had a color to it they'd never seen. And Cyrus Holloway was a man who'd been buried alive twice in his life and dug himself out both times, without losing that steady gray calm of his. This time, he was not calm. He went straight to the company office and told the superintendent, a Kanawha man named Vard Penhallow, a nephew of the owner's, that number 11 was to be stopped, sealed at the rock, no more cutting back of that gray seam. And Vard Penhallow, who had a quota to make and a railroad contract to fill, laughed at him. You can guess how that went. They kept cutting. I want to pause here, because I've been telling you about the dark a long while, and I don't want you to forget there's a person on the other end of this. You. Right there, listening. Have you ever stood somewhere? A real place, an ordinary place, and felt all of a sudden that you were not as alone as the room said you were? Not a ghost, nothing so simple. Just a sense, low down in the animal part of you, that something had taken notice of you. If that's ever happened to you, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Tell me where you were and what you did. I ask because I think more of you have felt it than will admit it, and I think this story is going to sit closer to some of you than you're expecting. A breath here before what comes next. If this voice is one you'd want to spend more time with, I keep a longer collection. The hollow files, 10 cases, 5 hours. The same kind of quiet trouble I'm telling you about now. The link is in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. And while we're here, this story, and every story on this channel, is read for you by Crime of Slaves. If you've made it this far, and the back of your neck is doing what I think it's doing, do me the kindness of subscribing. It's free, and it tells the people who count such things that stories like this one are worth keeping the lights on for. If you happen to be hearing my voice somewhere that isn't this channel, then somebody's taken it without asking, and you'd be doing me a real favor to let me know. All right, let's go back down to... They kept cutting number 11, like I said, and for a few days, nothing happened, which is always the worst way for a thing to begin. The men got bold. They went into the cold chamber on their dinner break to get out of the heat. Sat at the edge of the deep hole eating their bread, daring each other to lean out over it. Young men. You know how young men are. Lazarus Cruz wouldn't go near it. He'd eat his dinner up at the face in the 100-degree heat rather than sitting in that cool room. And the young ones ragged him about it. Then the lamps started going out. Not all at once. One man's, then another's. A carbide lamp does go out. That's nothing. You bang it and you light it again. But these went out together, 3 and 4 of them at a time. The way candles go out when a door opens somewhere in a house and lets the draft through. And every time it happened, The men said it happened right after they heard the knock. I should tell you about the knocking. It came from inside the rock, not the chamber. The solid rock, the walls of the heading, where there was nothing behind them but a mile of mountain. A knock, then a pause, then 2 knocks, then a pause, then 3. And then it would start over. 1, 2, 3. Patient, even, always the same. Now, miners are not children, and they are not fools. And there is an old true thing that the mountain itself makes noises. That water and settling rock and trapped air can knock and groan, and even, God help you, seem to call your name on a bad night. Every miner knows this. Cyrus knew it better than any of them. He went up and down that heading with his bare hand flat on the rock, feeling for the knock, trying to chase it down to a seep of water or a working timber, some honest cause. He never found one, and here is the thing that turned it from a story the men told into a thing the men feared. The knocking answered. A digger named Otis. A big, slow, good-natured fellow, 26 years old. Took up his hammer one shift, more to show he wasn't scared than anything, and he knocked on the wall 3 times, slow, the way you'd knock on a door, and the wall knocked back 3 times. Slow. The whole crew stood there in the dark with their little flames and listened to the rock answer a man. Otis didn't laugh. He knocked twice. The wall knocked twice. He knocked once. The wall knocked once. And then, before Otis could lift his hammer again, before any man there had decided what to do, the wall knocked a 4th time. On its own, a 4th knock. Soft. Almost shy. The way a thing knocks when it wants very much to be let in and is trying to be polite about it. They went out of number 11 that day, and most of them did not go back. Cyrus had a hard time of it then. The men wouldn't work the deep section. Vard Penhallow wanted the coal. Garrett Ashmore, the engineer, with his maps and his Eastern schooling, took it as a personal insult. The idea that grown men would walk off a paying seam over noises. Ashmore said it was gas. He said it was settling. He said the cold draft was just the mine breathing, the way mines do when the weather turns. The barometer pushing the bad air out one day and sucking it back the next. And that the knocking was the timbers, and that the men had spooked each other into hearing things, which men will do. And the worst of it is, every single thing Ashmore said was true. Mines do breathe, timbers do knock, frightened men do hear things. That's what makes it so hard, because there is always, right up to the very end, a sensible explanation standing next to the unsensible one, and a reasonable man can take the sensible one by the hand and walk himself right down into the dark holding on to it. Ashmore decided he would prove it. He would go back into number 11 alone on the night shift, when the mine was quiet, and he would sit in that chamber with his instruments and his lamp and his watch. And he would write down in his neat Eastern hand exactly what natural thing was making those noises. Cyrus tried to stop him. I want you to hear how Cyrus tried, because I've thought about it a great deal. He didn't tell Ashmore there was a devil down there. He didn't carry on. He just said, "Quiet, Garrett. There's a kind of quiet a mind gets, and a man who's been down enough years learns to leave when he hears it. I heard it down there. I'd ask you not to go." And Ashmore, who liked Cyrus, who respected him even, smiled and said, "Cyrus, that's exactly the kind of feeling I mean to explain." He went down on the night of the 11th of October, 1911. He took a watch and a lamp and a second lamp and a notebook. The night man at the mouth of the mine logged him in at 9:30. And here is where I have to be careful with you, because this is the part that the company tried to keep out of the record and mostly succeeded. And what we have come secondhand from the night man and from the notebook, which Cyrus kept until he died, and which his family kept after him. The notebook is the worse of the two. Ashmore wrote in it the whole time. He was a thorough man. He wrote down the temperature, which fell and fell again, and fell a third time far past anything the weather could account for. He wrote down the air pressure, which did not change. Which means the breathing of the mine, the in and out of that cold draft, was not the mountain breathing at all. Because if it had been, the pressure would have moved with it. And it didn't. It stayed dead level while the cold came in and out across his face all the same. He wrote down the knocking. He wrote down that he had answered it. He wrote in a hand that was still neat. I knocked 3. It returned 3. This is undoubtedly an acoustic effect, a reflection of my own sound off the chamber's far wall, delayed by the distance. I will test this by knocking in a pattern it cannot anticipate. And then there is a gap in the notebook. And then there is one more line, and the hand is not neat anymore. The last line in Garrett Ashmore's notebook says, "It knew the pattern before I did. The night man at the mouth heard him come up." That's the strange thing. Ashmore came up out of the mine on his own 2 feet at 20 minutes past 3 in the morning, which the night man knew because he wrote it in the log, and the log survives. Ashmore came up the slope out of the dark, and the night man called out to him, asked him how it went. Was it gas after all? Ashmore didn't answer. He walked past the night man and out the gate and down toward the houses. And the night man said, afterward, that the engineer's lamp was out, both his lamps, that he'd come the whole long way up through the black of the mine with no light at all, which no living miner can do, and that as he passed, the night man got a look at his face in the moonlight. The night man would never say what he saw. He quit the next morning, left the county. Some say he wrote a letter back years on, but if he did, no one kept it. Garrett Ashmore was found at first light, sitting on the porch of his company house in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes open, looking up the hollow toward the mine. Calm as anything. He was not hurt. There was not a mark on him. The doctor who came, a country doctor named Ephraim Caldwell, could find nothing wrong with the man's body at all. But Garrett Ashmore never said another word. Not one. Not for the rest of his life, which was long. He lived another 40 years. His sister came and took him back east to Pennsylvania and cared for him. And he sat in chairs and looked at things and ate when he was fed. And once a year, every year, on the night of the 11th of October, he would get up out of his chair, no matter where he was, no matter who tried to stop him, and he would go and find a wall. Any wall. And he would knock on it 3 times, and then he would wait. And then, his sister said, he would weep very quietly, like a man who has been waiting a long time for an answer that is never going to come, until somebody led him back to bed. I told you I'd suggest things rather than show them. I'll keep my word. There are parts of what happened in Cold Springs that the company sealed up tighter than they sealed that mine. And the reasons they sealed them are reasons enough that I'm not going to pry the lid up for you tonight. I'll only say this. After what happened to Ashmore, 3 more men were lost out of number 11 in the space of a single week, and not one of them was ever brought up. And the manner of their losing was such that the new superintendent, the one they sent in after Vard Penhallow himself, left the county in a hurry, ordered every paper concerning it burned in the company furnace. What I can tell you is what Cyrus Holloway did, because Cyrus by then was the only man in Cold Springs the diggers would still follow underground. He went down into number 11 one last time on the last day. With a crew of men, he picked himself, picked for their nerve and for the fact that none of them had wives or children waiting. Men who had made their peace with the dark a long time ago. They went in with timber and stone and barrels of cement, and they built a wall, not at the mouth of the mine, down deep at the gray seam where the cold chamber began. They built a wall there, thick as a man is tall, and they keyed it into the rock all around, so it could never be pushed out from the inside. And while they worked, the knocking went on the whole time, soft and patient on the other side of the stone. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Growing not louder, but somehow nearer. The way a sound seems nearer when the thing making it has stopped pretending it doesn't know you're there. And when the wall was nearly closed, with one last gap left to fill, Cyrus Holloway put his lamp up to that gap and looked through it. He never told a living soul what he saw. His daughter, an old woman herself, by the time anybody thought to write any of this down, said her father told her only one thing about that night, near the end of his own long life, when his mind was loosening and the past was coming up close around him. He told her, "It wasn't trying to get out, child. That's what nobody understood. All those years they thought we were keeping it in." And she asked him, "Weren't you, Papa?" And he looked at her, she said, with those steady gray eyes that had read the dark for 60 years. And he said, "No. We were keeping it company so it wouldn't come looking for some." They closed the wall. They came up out of number 11. And the company sealed the whole mine, the entire works, every level. Behind that wall of poured concrete and fieldstone that you can still go and look at today if you walk up the wrong hollow and find the fence. But here is the thing. Here is the answer to the question I started with. The one that's been waiting at the bottom of all of this, like the stone Cyrus dropped that never hit the ground. Sealing the mine was not enough, because 3 nights after they closed it, the knocking came out of the sealed mine through a mile of mountain and a wall thick as a man is tall, and the whole weight of the company's concrete. The night people of Cold Springs heard it, soft and even, drifting down the hollow on the cold air. 1, 2, 3. And on the 3rd night, somebody who lived nearest the mine, an old widow woman whose house has long since fallen in, went up to the sealed mouth in the dark to see what it was. And she answered it. She knocked back 3 times, the way you would knock on a door, the way Otis did, the way Ashmore did. And what came of that? Again, I won't lay out for you. But it was bad enough that the men of Cold Springs understood finally and completely the thing that Cyrus had been trying to tell them all along. That the danger was never that the thing would break out. The danger was that it was lonesome down there, in the dark behind the wall. And that loneliness reached the way a flame leans toward a hole, the way that cold draft moved, without any pressure to move it, the way the knocking always asked to be let in. And a thing like that, if it has no one to keep it company, will go looking. It will reach out through the rock for the nearest waking mind. The way Ashmore's mind was the nearest that night, he sat alone. And it will find someone, and it will knock, and God help whoever knocks, back into the dark expecting an echo. So Cyrus Holloway, in the last working years of his life, did the only thing he could think of. He set a watch. He chose 12 men, 4 to a shift, 3 shifts. So the sealed mine was never, for a single minute of a single hour of a single day, left alone in the dark with no living soul near it. The men were not there to keep the thing in. The wall did that. The men were there to be company, to sit at the gate near enough that the thing in the mountain would know it was not alone, that there was a warm mind close by present attending, so that it had no cause to send its long, cold reach down the hollow into the houses where people slept. 12 men. Always 12. Because Cyrus worked it out, and 12 was the number it took to never leave a gap, never leave a single hour unwatched. Because the one time, the only time, that the watch failed. The one night a storm came down so hard that the road washed out and the relief men couldn't get up the hollow, and the 4 on shift, soaked and frozen and exhausted, all 4 of them at once, just for an hour, just before dawn, fell asleep at their posts. That was the night they lost the youngest of the watch. I'll tell you only that in the morning, the other 3 woke, and there were 3 of them where there had been 4, and the fence gate, which they kept oiled, which they kept latched, was standing open, and there were marks in the wet ground leading up to the sealed mouth of the mine, going one way, only one way. And the knocking that morning, the men swore, sounded different than it ever had before. It sounded satisfied. After that, they never again let it fall below 12, and never again left it less than 4 awake at any hour. And they made a rule, the most important rule of the watch, the rule they pass down to every new man who takes a dead man's place at that gate, and it is the rule that has kept Cold Springs safe for more than 100 years now. You may sit near it. You may speak near it, so it knows you are there. But you do not, ever, for any reason, no matter what you hear in the long, cold hours before the light, no matter how patient and even and almost polite it sounds, no matter how badly some animal part of you wants to answer it the way you'd answer a knock at your own front door. You do not knock back. Cyrus Holloway lived to be 81 years old. He built himself a small house near the gate, and he took the worst shift, the deep night every night, for the rest of his life. And his daughter said that in all those years, she never once knew her father to sleep more than an hour at a stretch. He'd doze and wake and listen, and his hand would go up flat against the wall of his little house, the way it used to go flat against the rock, feeling, listening, and then he'd settle just a little and doze again. He never got the steady, gray calm back, but he kept the watch, and when he died, sitting up in his chair with his hand against the wall, the men found that he'd left careful instructions, written in a notebook of his own, for how the watch was to go on, who was to choose the 12, how the shifts were to run, the rule about the knocking, underlined 3 times, And at the very bottom, in the hand of a very old man, one last line. It said, "Don't let it be alone. It's the loneliness that's hungry. Be kind to it, and it will let us be." So that is why, if you walk far enough up the wrong hollow in the high coal country, you will come to a fence, and a gate that somebody keeps oiled, and a wall of concrete and field stone, and 4 men sitting near it in the cold every hour of every day. As there have been 4 men sitting near it every hour of every day for longer than anyone now living can remember. They will not tell you why. They are kind men mostly. They will share their coffee. They will talk about the weather and the road and the price of things. They will let you sit a while. But when the light goes blue and the cold comes up the hollow, they will go quiet, and they will listen. And if you're very still and very unlucky, you may hear it too, coming soft through a mile of mountain. 1, 2, 3. And the 4 men will sit there in the dark and not answer it. And you must not answer it either. You must let it knock and knock and knock. And you must hold your own 2 hands still in your lap. And you must keep it company without ever opening the door. Because the thing down in that mountain has been waiting a very long time, and it is patient, and it is not in any hurry at all. Now, I'll ask you what I always ask, and I want a true answer if you've got one. Do you believe there are things that have no name? Things that don't fit in any of the boxes we built to keep ourselves feeling safe? Or do you think, like Garrett Ashmore did, that there's always a sensible explanation standing right there next to the unsensible one, waiting to take you by the hand? Tell me in the comments. I read them. I think about them more than you'd guess. And if you know a story like this one, a real one, a fence somebody keeps oiled for a reason nobody will say, then share it with me. The next voice I tell might be yours. If you want 10 more like tonight's, the Hollow Files is waiting for you in the description and pinned up top in the comments. 5 hours of it. 10 counties. The same voice in the dark with you. Stay with me for the next one. And whatever you do, wherever you are, don't knock back.